Morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. My name is Eric Bush. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Demand Driven Technologies, and delighted to be your host for today's presentation. We're going to be taking a look at how Coca-Cola Beverages have improved their supply chain performance through the application of Demand Driven MRP. And I'll be introducing our guest speaker, Barry Anderson, here very shortly and talk a little bit about his background and the story behind that. Before we continue, though, I just want to highlight the agenda. We are going to be taking questions and answers at the end of the session. So while we have everyone on listen-only mode during the webinar, we really find that the best way to do that is to facilitate it by using the question panel in your webinar control panel, which I'll show you here in a second. If you can see here on your webinar control panel, there's a little feature called questions. If you open that up as we go through the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. We're expecting quite a few, so we're going to try to move quickly into the presentation to give you a chance to ask questions of Barry and get his perspectives on their implementation of DDMRP and Replenishment Plus. We are also recording the session, and we'll share the link to the recording with all of the registrants so that you can take advantage of that. You'll also be able to share that link with other members of your organization, which you may find useful after participating in today's session. And then finally, we'll hit the question and answer at the tail end of the webinar. Just to set a little context here, I think it's interesting as we've been implementing demand-driven MRP with clients around the world that some of the industry segments have been particularly benefiting from the application of these concepts. In particular, food and beverage has been a great industry for us. But yet in their environment, and Barry will talk about this in his remarks, there's been a number of new entrants coming into the market. If you look at your grocery store, your markets, you can see that there's been just a flurry of activity around what we call niche and craft providers, whether it's craft beer or beverages or food products, you name it. There's been a tremendous amount of diversity brought into the market in the last several years. Increasingly, too, companies are interested in having better product freshness. The born-on dates of the products is becoming more and more a buying criteria for the consumer. And so along with that and the changing preferences, it's created a very, very challenging environment from a supply chain standpoint for those companies that are operating in the food and beverage industry. And, when you think about it, some companies have doubled their SKU counts. Barry will talk about the observations that they've been through at Coca-Cola. But we've not seen similar increases in headcount of the planning staff. And as a result, it's made it more and more challenging for the planning community to keep up with the rate of change that they're experiencing out in the industry. So I'm going to hand it over here shortly to Barry. I just want to spend a minute just sharing some of his background with you. Barry's been with the Coca-Cola business in Africa now. He's based in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, which is a beautiful small town on the coast there, for over 20 years in a variety of different roles. And so he's kind of worked his way through a lot of the supply chain challenges that you can imagine have been out there. Barry is now the group planning leader for the South Africa or the African countries in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a mouthful. He is the person that really leads the group for there's about 10 to a dozen countries that they're implementing and have made great progress over the past year with their implementation of demand-driven MRP and our solution. He's going to go through his presentation. One final comment here. Some of you may not be familiar with the concepts of demand-driven MRP. It's a growing movement. We will be mentioning a follow-on webinar that we're going to run next week, which will go into more detail about the DDMRP concepts and bring those to life for you. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Barry. I've had a great working relationship with him over the past year and a half. Really excited to be able to share this story with all of you. So Barry, over to you.
Thank you, Eric. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I'm sure it's a VUCA world that we live in, you all may agree. And what we thought VUCA looked like just changed completely over the last couple of months with the worldwide pandemic on us. But what did VUCA look like in our business? As Eric mentioned, with the VUCA, with the changing world, with changing consumer preference, SKU proliferation. The consumer has more choice, wants more choice. And we saw a 57% increase in calendar year 2017-2018, just in our SKU proliferation within the Coke system in Africa. Also, new categories, channel preferences. E-channels are becoming more and more popular with the COVID pandemic, and we need to get involved in more and more channels. As we get involved in more channels and more SKUs, there are more competitors, there are more players in the market, more than double the competitors we had a year ago. And all of this impacts our business. And in what way did it impact our business? Let's have a look at some hard results. So in the fast-moving consumer goods business, a couple of important KPIs are out of stock. So in the 4 years, 2013 to 2016, I use 2016 as my base year. That is the year in which we embarked on the DDMRP journey. Out of stock levels range from high 20s into the high teens. Not great improvement, but some. On time in full deliveries range from low 60s to low 70s over the same period. Forecast accuracy at an SKU level hovering around the mid 60% range, with no real marked improvement over the period. So, who are we? We are Coca-Cola Beverages Africa, and this is our journey. We are the 8th largest Coca-Cola bottler in the world. In 2018, selling 916 million unit cases, which represents approximately 40% of the Coca-Cola volume in Africa. As you can see from the map, we operate predominantly in South and East Africa, in the countries demonstrated. So what did planning look like for us? Well, for many years, we've been following the same traditional planning routines and processes which many large corporates do. This being the traditional Oliver White S&OP model, supported by SAP, ERP with standard underlying MPS and MRP logic, i.e. the forecast-driven master production schedule and the resultant material requirements planning. And what goes hand in hand with this is all the regular workarounds and cheats, like forced days of stock cover, extensive use of Excel spreadsheets, and frozen time horizons, which pretty much resulted in us doing the wrong stuff really efficiently. Continuous improvement entailed finding ways of improving forecast accuracy and doing the same things, which are often the wrong things, faster. This resulted in a performance plateau with no marked improvement in results, as seen earlier. Conflicting KPIs across functions, and the entire process becoming adversarial and subjective, with emotions often running high in the review meetings. We realized we had to do things differently, but we didn't know how, we didn't know what. Intro 2016. In February of 2016, we had planned a planning conference, a planning managers meeting here in Port Elizabeth. And the objective of this meeting was to find ways of improving forecast accuracy. I'm sure that sounds familiar to many of you. One of the speakers we'd invited to come and talk to us asked if he could do a short presentation on Demand Driven MRP, which he did. Obviously, at this point, our curiosity was piqued. Our first exposure to it definitely found we need to find out more what this is all about. By October of 2016, a core group of us went on the core training, on the DDMRP training, and we realized that this may be the solution we'd been looking for. Did the certified demand-driven planner training and took it from there. By February 2017, we felt confident enough in our knowledge of the process to launch a pilot in Namibia. Namibia being a nice, relatively small country in our portfolio and a very capable team. So we launched a pilot in Namibia with a homegrown Excel tool, which we developed just to assist us in the DDMRP logic. All along our journey, our philosophy has always been software before software, learning and training being paramount. The users had to learn the theory first, and as I mentioned in the case of Namibia, develop their own tools to manage the process. I'm a firm believer in understanding how something works before implementing software. By September of 2017, we realized that our homegrown Excel tool just wasn't good enough. It took us too long to pull the various reports from SAP and update the Excel model, that the information was no longer relevant by the time it was available. I'd attended a presentation at one of the SAPEX conferences where an Excel tool that was developed specifically for DDMRP was demonstrated. We approached Tony Rice, and he developed a DDMRP tool in Excel for our purposes, which we rolled out in Namibia. In October of that year, we also launched that Excel tool and the DDMRP principles in Mozambique. By February 2018, we exposed the remaining group planning managers to the Demand Driven Planner training. And in March of that year, rolled out the Excel tool and the principles in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Tanzania. At this point, I'd just like to share a couple of testimonials for some of the planning managers that were part of the process.
My name's Stephen Wicks. I'm the planning manager for Namibia, based in Windhoek. Adopting DDMRP was eye-opening from the beginning. The simplicity and ease with which it made the planning process really helped the team get into using it from the very beginning. If I had to summarize DDMRP into one word, it would be visibility. We are able to see at first glance the actual status of our raw materials and finished goods, which guides us in the right direction to do our replenishments in the right order, right priority, and to the correct buffer zones. We've managed to reduce our finished goods and raw material stock holdings, which has given us a great benefit of our working capital investment. We've also managed to reduce improve our days of coverage on imported materials from 14 days to 13 days, and on our own manufactured goods from 14 days to 11 days. All in all, it gives us a great ability to react to changes in demand, where before it would take a bit of time to figure things out. Now we know exactly where we're going and what the target is. It's given us a great amount of flexibility in our planning, and we no longer get surprises we used to in the past.
Hello, my name is Sheila Birunji. I'm Central Planning Manager for Uganda, which is part of the Coca-Cola Beverages Africa group. We're in East Africa. Uganda rolled off DDMRP in about March 2018, and of course, rolling out any new tool means that you really have no idea what you're dealing with. It was quite new for us, but we needed to first understand what are the principles behind DDMRP, what are the benefits we're going to realize from it, what is the Excel tool that we were using. We're using an Excel tool that wasn't very easy, but we had to, with months and trying to build and learn from it, we started to see the results come through. Taking this tool back home, we had to get the managers buy-in, the colleagues buy-in to understand the benefits of it. And as soon as we got that, it helped us even work better in using the DDMRP tool. So for us, DDMRP has been a journey. Given where we were before, with a lot of inventory, not in the right place, a little too much, a little too low, that sort of curve, we've managed to see that now with the implementation, we are seeing a better optimum inventory levels, better customer service, better working capital, and we are really excited to get into this and start to see the results come through from DDMRP.
Hi, my name is Salum Nassor. I'm a Central Planning Manager of Coca-Cola Kwanza in Tanzania. Coca-Cola Kwanza is one of the CCBA debottlers, and is one of the most organized companies in terms of planning and executions. But internally, we knew we were very much struggling with overage of stock outs, and we were doing planning based on the forecast. And we know forecasts are always inaccurate. So working away, doing away the forecast inaccuracies, we decided to move into the DDMRP, I think in March last year, 2018. And then we started with full goods. We did so well there, which gave us hope to now go into the raw material planning using the DDMRP. And I think we started in July, and between July and December last year, we almost cut down 30% of the working capital inventories. I think one of the benefits operation-wise is it simplifies the planner's job on day-to-day basis, because it takes away the debate away from the discussions and the decisions, because you always sit with the executors of the plan and you say, why do you plan it like that and why do you want it executed like that? So it takes that debate away from the discussion. And on the bigger picture, I think it can improve the cash flow of the company, which is the main thing that we're looking at, because now you can have your inventories at the optimal level, which is so good. I think one of the challenges that we can talk about is the stakeholders buy-in, because they're used to doing things one way and for so long. So you need to explain before that, give a bit of education there, which we did very well. I think every company needs to do that. And then at the top level management, because these are the people that have been with the company for so long. So these are the guys that you need to have like change of management, because they're used to doing something a certain way for so long. So I think that would be a challenge for any company moving into DDMRP. Otherwise, it's the way to go. If I can conclude it, I say simplifies the planner's job, as well as it benefits the company in terms of working capital management.
As you would have heard Stephen say there in his testimonial, he mentions a couple of days improvement, reduction in stock holding. And it doesn't sound terribly impressive. It says moves from 14 days to 13 days and 14 days to 11 days. But in the nature of our company, in the nature of our product, a one-day swing can be $100,000 US. So there's a lot of value in small incremental improvements like that. As Sheila stated, the DDMRP principles, although not difficult to understand, are so different from the traditional ways of planning that it takes time for everyone to get used to the new way of thinking. And Salum raised the important point of change management. And that is probably the single most difficult aspect of getting DDMRP implemented in an organization. We utilize the services of dedicated change management and communication agents to assist us in this challenging task, especially at a senior level. So by June 2018, we found that we needed some way of bridging the gap between the theory and the practice, especially for those members of staff who were not directly involved with the DDMRP, but were impacted by the changed ways of work. I'd heard of a program called DD Bricks, developed by Laurent Vigoureau from B2Wise, and attended one of his workshops. I liked the simplicity of the game and the powerful way in which he demonstrated the principles of DDMRP. I underwent the training and became a certified facilitator of this program. And I've been using this program, DD Bricks Game, extensively within our organization as part of our change management process. By September 2018, we found that the Excel model was no longer meeting all our requirements from a group perspective, and we were ready to find proprietary DDMRP software to take us to the next level. And in November, identified Demand Driven Technologies as the software vendor to partner with in our DDMRP journey with their Replenishment Plus software. By the end of 2018, just getting back to our results, with using an Excel model and the principles of DDMRP, we already saw marked improvement in our KPIs. Out of stocks, moved into single digits. On time in full, up into the mid-80s. Neither of these are world-class, but a marked improvement. And forecast accuracy, what happened with that? Well, absolutely nothing. We weren't able to improve the forecast accuracy, which just proves the robustness of the DDMRP philosophy, where we can improve the results without improving the forecast. Into 2019, in January 2019, we had a design workshop of the Replenishment Plus model for Coca-Cola Beverages Africa in Port Elizabeth, where we had all the team involved and developing and building the model for our purposes. A lot of time was spent in building the interface between SAP and R+, ensuring accurate and timeless data integration. And in June of that year, we had our first go live of Replenishment Plus in Namibia. Within the first 2 months of the R+ go live in Namibia, we saw a 29% reduction in inventory levels of total inventory. And this after we'd been running for more than a year on the XR model, where we'd also seen some improvements. 38% in the bought-in materials, so predominantly raw materials, and a 27% improvement in the distributed materials. These are the items held at the sales and distribution centers. In August 2019, we went live in Uganda, September, Mozambique and Tanzania, and November, Ghana, Ethiopia, and then later in Kenya. As part of the change management and communication plan around the DDMRP and the R+ go live in the various countries, we developed storyboards, which we put up in the operations to create and maintain awareness. This one depicting the transition from MRP to DDMRP. It's a nice conversation starter, people that aren't really involved in it. So it gives you an opportunity to explain it very simplistically, what the difference is between the two. And this one just highlights very high level the process around R+, so that where the ERP and R+ interfaces work, how often they run, and what happens in the two different systems. So where does that leave us at the moment? What is our current status? So currently we are live with R+ and DDMRP in 7 countries. That's approximately 47 sites, a combination of manufacturing as well as sales and distribution sites, with 2 more countries on the cards for the balance of 2020, second half of 2020. The COVID pandemic has put a slight delay on that, but we will have 2 more countries live by the end of the year. And the rollouts, the 7 rollouts that we've done is we've managed, except for the first 3, which we did with the assistance of Demand Driven Technologies, we basically did those deployments internally, which means we used own resources to do the implementations. The implementations after the first couple is really a copy-paste exercise, and training material is well defined and clearly set up. So the implementations locally or internally was the obvious way for us to go. Just a bit of something that we're dealing with as well. In the same time, we're also migrating our ERP system to MS Dynamics. So that will be a challenge for the next couple of years. Something that we found, we've been using the S&OP system for many years, and then with DDMRP, we kind of lost focus a little bit. With the focus on the demand-driven operating model, getting the buffers in place, getting the execution in place, we, to an extent, lost a bit of focus on the higher level, on the S&OP. And towards the end of last year, we've pretty much refocused on the demand-driven S&OP, which is basically facilitated through the R+ APM module, the Advanced Planning module. And from this module, we are capable or able of sharing projected supply requirements with our vendors, projecting working capital levels with finance into the future, and projecting pallet counts for warehouse capacity planning. We've also implemented rough cut capacity planning as part of the APM module, and to assess the forward-looking production capacity requirements within our organization across our various plants and lines. And that is where we are at the moment. Also something that we're looking at going forward with the lockdowns, and that perhaps a little bit later this year, we're looking at extending DDMRP and R+ 1 level down in our supply chain into our strategic supply partners, our wholesalers, our vendors. And but yes, so at this point, if there's any questions. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Barry, for that summary. A couple comments I'd want to add here before we get into the questions. First of all, apologies to those of you who weren't able to hear the video segments. I was finding that I was able to hear, but I had to unmute my PC speakers, so that may have been a bit of a disruption that you might have experienced, and our apologies for that. We'll make sure in the webinar recording that those videos came across correctly, and want to make sure that you get the full understanding of kind of the user experience, if you will, in terms of what their observations were and, you know, how they adopted to the demand-driven MRP methodology as well, and the experience that they had. There's also a few other videos that Barry had included that we took out just for the sake of convenience here. Showing videos in the GoToWebinar environment isn't the easiest thing to do, so we tried to take a few of those out, but I think we'll be able to get those posted along with the webinar links so that you'll get the full understanding of the user's perspective, because I think that's a really important part of the story here, is their, you know, how they accepted that and were able to take advantage of the changes. So with that, I'm going to look to the question panel here and take a look at what questions we've got that came in. Tried to answer a few of them along the way that came in. There was a question about what was the meaning of the OOS, OTIF, and FA acronyms. Out of stock is OOS, OTIF is on time in full, and FA was the forecast accuracy. Barry, any other comments on those metrics? I would assume those are traditionally the kind of metrics you've been focused on through your supply chain activities with CCBA?
Yes, absolutely. No, that's quite correct. It's out of stock, on time in full, and forecast accuracy. Those are probably the key metrics from us in a consumer goods environment that is pretty much what's important. It's all about the customer.
Okay. Okay. Here's a good question. What challenges arose in working with your suppliers with this new process? Were there any challenges or benefits that came as a result?
Yes, definitely. What we found with suppliers is, especially as we've gotten involved in APM, the Advanced Planning Module, where we now give the forecasts, because as I'm sure in many organizations or industries, your suppliers need some kind of indication of what's coming, what's in the horizon for them. And with this, we found that we've been able to give them a lot more accurate forecast of what our requirements are going to be in monthly and weekly buckets going forward. So that has been a big improvement. We've actually had comments from one or two of our suppliers that says, we don't know what you're doing differently, but keep doing it. Your stability of your requests aren't changing as often, because that's something we found with traditional MRPs. Every time you run it, your requirement changes, and then you either expediting or you're calling the supplier with a changed order, an increase in the order or a reduction in the order or a delay in the delivery or an expedite. And a lot of that has been done away with. We're still not where we would like to be, but there's been a marked improvement in that.
Okay. All right. Here was a question on change management. You showed some of those highlights around, you know, some of the change management display boards that you put up to try to help people understand. What were some of the other challenges that you had in getting perhaps senior leadership and understanding and commitment to the change process? Were there other, you know, anecdotes that you could share on that front, Barry?
Yes, change management is arguably the most difficult part of this, and not because DDMRP is very complex. It is actually very simplistic, and that's the beauty of it. And at the same time, that is also one of the big question marks. The people that have been in business for many, many years and have grown up through the MRP environment tend to say, but it's too simple. It's never going to work for us. We're too complex. We're too big. The supply chain is too long. And what we found is the more complex your bill of materials actually the better it works. So to prove that has been the challenge. So changing a lot of old, firmly held beliefs in the way that business should run or planning should happen, that has been the biggest challenge for us. What has worked well is the DD Bricks game. Just to demonstrate, so how that works is basically it takes you through 4 rounds, of which you then show traditional methodologies, and then that changes into the DDMRP philosophy. And that I've found has been a big eye-opener, especially for the guys that have been in manufacturing for many years. They're very firmly held beliefs, which the game breaks down in a very simplistic way and demonstrates how the DDMRP principles actually work.
Okay. Here's a good one. What is the plan with forecast accuracy of raw materials? Your presentation didn't show an improvement there. So can you just comment on raw materials, things like concentrate, labels, caps, things like that?
Yes. So basically what's happened is we found that the forecast accuracy metric that I showed was basically at an SKU on a weekly, in the weekly buckets. All right. So that's the metric that I showed, and that ranges around the 60% mark. What we found is instead of using that forecast to try and convert that into raw material requirements, which basically is what happens in your MRP system, which then sends out the requirements or raises the requirements against your suppliers, we found that looking at the forecast in bigger buckets, in monthly buckets, you get a lot better natural accuracy from it. And working through that in your APM, in your advanced planning module, so we're taking the forecast looking forward based on some of the history, and we're using that as the basis of which we then not giving the supplier our sales forecast, but giving the supplier our requirement forecast of their specific raw material. So in the past, what would happen is we give them a forecast of our projected sales. Now we're giving them a forecast of what the actual requirements of that specific raw material, be it concentrate, be it a closure or a label, or whatever it may be. And we just found that the accuracy of that is a lot more reliable. I don't know if I'm answering your question there.
Yeah, very helpful. So, yeah, there's so many questions here. I'm going to just trying to pick ones that we haven't already touched on. Is there a set of criteria used to identify parts that are unsuitable for buffering in a generalized fashion? You might talk about how some of the components that go into the end products berry are unbuffered and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. So basically, just a bit of background on how the beverage industry works. We have a single step process. So it starts from nothing and it ends with product on the floor. So there's no subcomponents, there's no work in progress, there's none of that. So also we have worked with a single level BOM. So everything is on a single level. There's no pre-manufacture of any goods. The only thing that we have is something called a final syrup. So we mix up some water, sugar, and syrup and concentrate, and that becomes a final syrup. That then gets mixed with carbonation and water, and then that ends up as a final product. And we found that we didn't buffer because it's not really something that you make and keep in stock. You make it as you need it in a continuous process. So as you decide you're going to produce brand Coca-Cola, you start from mixing water and sugar and you end with Coke in a bottle in the warehouse. So in those situations, we found that we wouldn't buffer those kind of things. But for us, we also, and because, as I mentioned, we have a single step process and there's no subcomponents so we don't buffer anything within the manufacturing process. So all our buffering happens in raw materials before the manufacturing and in finished goods after manufacturing. So in a more complex environment, an engineering environment, you'll probably have buffering points within the manufacturing process, which we found not suitable to our industry.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier about food and beverage. There's a very, very high percentage of the items in the CCBA portfolio that are actually going to be buffered with DDMRP rules. The exceptions would be some of those that Barry mentioned, along with maybe a promotional cap or label or carton or something like that. But very, very high percentage of the items are going to end up being buffered in their environment. What would you do differently in the implementation? If you had to go back and do it over again, are there things that you would have done differently, Barry?
Yes, I would have gotten the thought leaders, Carol Chapsmith, to speak to our executive management, to convince the CEO, get him on board first, and then take it from there. Because this is not a process like any change. It doesn't work from the bottom up. It has to be leader-led. It has to be driven from the top down. So yes, I think we would have saved a lot of time and pain if we had if we flipped it on its head. If we did it from the top down. And I think that would have been the biggest change I would have done. Other than that, I think what we did right was as I mentioned there, the software before the software. Very much focused on capability building, training, understanding what it is that DDMRP is about before putting a piece of software against it. I don't like put a piece of software and we learn how to use the software rather than learn how to use the process. What's the philosophy behind it?
One last question on kind of getting buy-in. There was a question about what business justification did you have in convincing your board and your senior leadership team to move forward? I know you had gained some early preliminary results with the spreadsheet implementation you did, but were there other elements that contributed to your business case?
Yes, we actually looked at that, and we looked at the hard KPIs and we looked at the soft KPIs. And my entire intention with DDMRP, or the thing that got me on board initially, was I was losing planners, which is a problem in many industries because of the nature of the work. You kind of redoing the same thing every day, sometimes multiple times a day. What you planned this afternoon changes by tomorrow morning, and maybe by lunchtime you've changed it again. And a lot of time is spent on chasing up and expediting and pretty much chasing your tail. So I was looking for a way to make life easier for planners, make it more transparent, make it more visible, take out a lot of the arguments, take out a lot of the debate, so that we could have a common dashboard that everybody could see. Well, this is obvious what the requirements are, what the priorities are, and not who shouts loudest. Is it sales that shouts loudest for a certain product, or is it manufacturing that shouts for longer runs and better OEEs and KPIs on the manufacturing line? Is it the warehouse that's complaining about no space? So that was what I was looking for. What we found was the hard KPIs, as I demonstrated, at a stock that showed improvement, but the one KPI that we built the business case on was on the reduction of working capital. And purely on that one, we basically justified the implementation of DDMRP and then the R+ implementation thereafter.
Awesome. Okay, just reading through a lot of questions here to make sure we hit on ones. Talk about the COVID crisis and how you've used DDMRP. Has it helped you? What techniques were you using to address some of the challenges that you found in the various countries?
That is an excellent question. Yeah, COVID.
We could like spend the next 30 minutes just scratching the surface.
Yes, it is. To be quite honest, COVID is so different to anything we've ever experienced. I don't think any planning tool really had planned or catered for it. I mean, unless you were doing scenario planning at a very high level, I don't think we would have ever foreseen this. But it happened. It's happening in many of our territories still. What did we do? Okay, so obviously there was a bit of panic, and once again, it's typical of human nature. When panic struck, we kind of disregarded what the recommendations were from DDMRP and went ahead and bought in mountains of stock, raw materials, and now we're sitting with the problem of too much of this stuff. So yes, I think we should have used DDMRP more in the early stages of the COVID pandemic, of the threat, but we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know what the impact of closures of borders are going to be, because much of our raw material is imported, and we didn't know what would happen with countries we're sourcing this stuff from. PET, for instance, comes out of China. And so, yes, so we made a couple of panic decisions, knee-jerk decisions, which in retrospect weren't the right decisions. In some of our territories, in some of our materials, we actually then applied something called the cycle day adjustment factor, which we then consciously built in cycle day adjustments to increase the size of the buffer to actually accommodate for the pandemic and for what was coming. Things that happened was, which we also didn't know, in the lockdown, we didn't realize that restaurants and bars and clubs would lock down. So a big chunk of our sales volume, immediate consumption, was shut down. So there was a distinct move from immediate consumption to future consumption, which resulted in some territories actually a growth in future consumption packs, in the big packs, 2 liters, 1.5 liters, and a complete slowdown, and in some cases zero sales of the small packs, those 300s and 500s. So yeah, so we didn't know what we didn't know, and I think retrospectively we could have trusted it a bit more. The buffers are pretty robust, and I think we would have been in a better position had we just done the cycle day adjustment factors, kept to the routines, and instead of doing the panic buying.
Yeah, one of the things that I think I would share here too is that the thing that was so interesting to learn as we traveled to Namibia and kind of learn more about the business that CCBA operates in sub-Saharan Africa. These countries are not like what you would experience in the more mature markets like the US or the countries in Europe and the like, where there is what they call modern trade, which is your big grocery chains, your big markets and things like that. They're more of a traditional trade where you've got a bigger number of smaller customers that you're supplying into. And I don't think at least we didn't see it, I didn't see it in our reviews. You didn't experience the panic buying that we saw with things like toilet paper in the US. I think maybe there was some of that, but it was a little different kind of a picture. Any comments on that, Barry?
Yes, we didn't, and especially in our industry and in beverage, we didn't have the panic buying. So no, we didn't have the sudden spike up front and running out of stock. So no, that wasn't a big problem. But yes, to your point, more than half of that, depending on which country on, some countries as much as 80–90% of the business is through informal trade, and a lot of that was shut down during the lockdowns. So we lost a lot of volume in those channels, and the supermarkets and the spaza shops that were able to remain open are predominantly more the larger packs, the future consumption, the take-home pack, and we actually saw a bit of a growth in those packs. Yes, it was interesting and surprising at the same time.
Yep. Here's another good one. What are your thoughts on expanding the DDMRP capabilities to other regions? Can you talk about any thoughts on that?
I don't know if I quite understand the question, but a question I've been asked similar to this is, how has it worked in Africa? And once again, the principles are really straightforward, and once the training is done, the understanding is really good. It's not rocket science. It's not highly complex. The math is relatively straightforward and easy. So we found that in all of our markets, regardless of level of capability, it has actually worked well, to the point where I think it's actually worked better for us in some of our African territories than some case studies I've heard in Europe and the US, where the resistance to change has been a lot higher because they believe that what they've been doing has been perfect. Where in Africa, the guys are so eager to learn and so eager to do something better and easier that it's actually been pretty easy for us to implement.
Yeah, very good point. Just reading through the last ones here. Can you share any kind of insights on improvements on the days cover in finished products? I think back on your charts on the Namibia side, I think we've seen somewhere in the neighborhood of a 30% reduction. So that would translate to what kind of improvement in days, Barry?
That is something that we learned, is days cover is a misleading KPI. And it's something that we're trying to move away from. We still record it, well, we report on it, but it's misleading in the sense that it's based on the buffer size. So within a category, within, it's like finished goods, PET, your plastic bottles, within the different pack sizes, in the different flavors, you will have different buffer sizes for different SKUs. And one SKU may have a days cover of 3 days or 5 days, one may have 21 days. So those no longer have relevance to us. It's no longer what is the days cover, it is, are you in the right zone in your buffer? Are you in the green zone in your buffer? When you hit the yellow, are you replenishing it timelessly? Because the buffer is dynamically sized for that SKU in that sales center. So days cover kind of has lost impact for us and lost meaning. So a lot more focus on, are your buffers sized correctly and are you in the right zone in your buffer? But yes, overall, there has been a reduction in days cover.
Beyond the cost decreases in inventory and your costs there, can you point out any other operational improvements or cost improvements of note?
Well, obviously the improvement in the out of stocks there's definite improvement there. The flip side of that is also by only manufacturing enough to replenish a buffer and not doing the 7-hour minimum runs just to get the production efficiencies, we've also been able to cut down on overstocks and write-offs. We've actually been able to reduce on stock obsolescence and write-offs in the warehouse. Being able to manage the raw materials stock aging better. As I say, now with COVID, we find ourselves in a bit of a predicament, but that we will work our way through. Then, yes, and less expedite. I mean, expediting costs, cutting into a production plan, expediting with suppliers, shipping stuff in, flying stuff in. So we've put a lot more stability in the process. There's a lot less panic, a lot less knee-jerk reaction, so that all saves money. And yeah, then obviously, as I said, my big benefit is the visibility and the ease of use and the happiness, for lack of a better word, of my planning community.
Mm-hmm. There's a question that's related, kind of, I think, on the distribution side of things, and did you encounter any inefficiencies from the logistics or anything like that? You might want to talk about the stock deployment module and the process there.
Yes, so within R+, there's something called, as Eric mentioned, there's something called the stock deployment module. And basically what that does is it looks at what has to be moved from a central warehouse or a manufacturing site to a sales and distribution center. And basically it gives you by day, the priorities, the quantities, and probably the biggest thing there is, how do you optimize your transport? How do you fill a truck? How do we balance it over a week so we don't have certain days that we've got to rent in trucks and certain days the trucks are standing idle. So there's a bit of that, but what happens is, so we've got into a cycle of giving a weekly view of what has to be moved, and then a daily confirmation, and then the logistics teams then go and then try and smooth it and optimize truck capacities and filling up trucks and that. And that's what's nice about the tool in R+ is you can see, okay, I need to replenish everything that's in yellow and red, but if I've got space on the truck, I can actually see which is the next level in green or the next one that's in green, but is going to go into yellow first, and I can replenish those as well. So there's some really nice tools built into ARC Plus to optimize those replenishments.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There was a question here about whether you consider the implementation of DDMRP and a new ERP system at the same time dangerous.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Okay, so let's clarify that. So basically, DDMRP and ARC Plus was implemented in 7 countries and on a SAP platform. So those were kind of very established SAP users platform. So that's done. The ARC Plus is in place. People are now used to it. They've been using it for some countries for more than a year now. Some of them a little bit less, and I think they're pretty much established in that. The 2 go lives for this year, which would be Zambia and Botswana, that is a bigger challenge because yes, we're doing the new ERP and ARC Plus at the same time, but it's really the only way of making it work, because implementing ARC Plus on an old platform didn't make sense, because the data availability on the legacy systems that they were using or currently using would have made the integration very, very difficult. Then alternatively was go to MS Dynamics first and then later introduce DDMRP. But that means then they have to learn the MRP process within MS Dynamics. So you're learning the bad behaviors and the bad routines just to relearn something new again. So we decided big bang approach for these 2 countries. We're going to go MS Dynamics and ARC Plus at the same time. The balance of the countries will then, over the next 2 to 3 years, then migrate from SAP to MS Dynamics, and then it will just be an ERP change. So the ARC Plus stays exactly the same. It's just where it sources its information from a new ERP system.
I found one here that I can answer. The question is ARC Plus a market product or an in-house developed? ARC Plus is Replenishment Plus. It's offered by Demand Driven Technologies, a company I'm the CEO of. We can provide more information for any of you who are interested in that. The interesting aspect of the work that we're doing with Barry and the team in Botswana is they are migrating to Microsoft Dynamics F&O, which is what used to be called Dynamics AX, for those of you who are familiar with ERP systems. It is Microsoft's cloud version, and so actually the integration that we've developed for them for F&O with ARC Plus is going to be very cohesive. F&O runs in the Microsoft Azure environment where we run Replenishment Plus. The integration that we've built is going to be certified by Microsoft here shortly and available through the App Source catalog. So that's a very, very tight and cohesive integration. And that's something that's, I think, a notable point here is that we can talk about that more. We're going to run a follow-on webinar next week, which I'd encourage people to participate in, where we're going to go into more detail about the demand-driven MRP methodology and kind of the application, kind of get into another level of depth around buffer strategies, the techniques that you utilize. You'll be able to see the advanced planning module and the rough cut capacity planning and other factors that Barry has mentioned here. But we really wanted to focus this one on more kind of the business aspects that Barry's done, I think, a great job sharing. One last question here, I think, and then we'll adjourn. Do you focus more on using a past rate of demand for the buffers, Barry, or are you using forecast?
Yes, short answer.
Yes, both.
Yes, both. It depends. It depends on where you are. It depends on what time of the year you're in. It depends on your situation. For example, at the moment, we're just coming out of COVID lockdown. So yes, our history has been depressed. It's not real. So we're basically looking at a forecasted demand at the moment, because the past actually isn't a true reflection of what we're hoping the future is going to look like. Similarly, if we go into a peak, we have a very big December peak. We also tend to go with the forecast rather than the backward looking, and purely because on a backward looking, it just doesn't catch up with the increased demand. So it works fine, but it's probably just a little bit slow, and then you have the risk of stockouts. And then we have the blended option as well, where we will look at a blend of the backward looking with the forecast. And we're finding in a lot of our environments that a blend is actually a very nice method to use. So yes, it very much depends on, and sometimes it actually differs between a manufacturing site and a sales and distribution center. So in the one we'll use one, and the other we'll use something different. So very much trial and error.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the point made there, it's really centered around those kind of special time periods, like around the end of the year, which is your summertime, and obviously the Christmas holidays and things like that. There's obviously a big hump of demand there. And clearly the COVID situation's presented a new wrinkle to be able to manage around. But for the most part, I'd say the bulk of the items are on an average daily usage value, which is a trailing average. The consumption rates don't vary that substantially period to period, and they get really good performance on that front. So Barry, thank you so much. I want to just wrap up here. Really appreciate all your time and the comments, especially the question and answer. We wanted to have a lengthy question and answer period. I'm apologizing to all of those who we didn't get a chance to answer your questions. I tried to find those that would kind of cover topics we hadn't yet addressed. But again, we will be sharing a link to the recording of the webinar. We will verify that the vignettes around the users' comments play correctly and are audible so that you'll be able to hear those. And we'll also look to share the other user testimonials that were available in that presentation that we didn't get a chance to include here. As well, we're going to run this next webinar. So this would be really taking a more in-depth look at how demand-driven MRP, how the methodology actually works and its application in Replenishment Plus in an F&B kind of a context. We're going to demonstrate kind of more a day in the life of a planner from a food and beverage standpoint. And I think you'll all find that really helpful, and it'll bring to life some of the questions and answers that came up in our session today. So with that, and also we will be sharing a PDF of the presentation as well as the link to the recording of today's webinar. Please, though, you'll be seeing social media posts around the registration link for the subsequent webinar. Hope you can join us for that session as well. And so with that, we want to thank Barry. Thank you so much for your support, for your business, obviously, too, but also for sharing all those great insights with the folks on the webinar here. And we'll look forward to working with all of you on your demand-driven journey. And please stay healthy and stay safe. And we'll meet you down the road. So meeting adjourned. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.